She walked into the bank, wearing dirty clothes and torn shoes. The employees laughed, mocked her, until the screen showed 3.7 million euros. Their laughter died instantly. What happened next will restore your faith in humanity. But before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling Heights Bank, casting geometric patterns across the polished marble floor. Tuesday had brought its usual rhythm, the soft clicking of keyboards, the rustle of documents, the hushed conversations between consultants and clients. Everything moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Then Elena Rivera walked in. She moved quietly through the revolving door, her worn canvas jacket slightly too large for her frame, her jeans faded from countless washes. Dirt smudged her hands, evidence of a morning shift at the community garden where she volunteered. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the gleaming floor as she approached the main desk. Richard Chen sat at consultation station 3, his navy suit perfectly pressed, his tie knotted with mathematical precision. With 15 years at Sterling Heights, he prided himself on reading clients the moment they entered. The expensive watch meant investment portfolios. The designer handbag suggested premium accounts. The nervous fidgeting indicated loan applications. But this girl? She was clearly lost. Jessica, the teller at window 2, noticed Elena first and exchanged a knowing glance with Richard. Thomas Brighton, the branch manager, looked up from his office, eyebrows raising slightly at the unusual visitor. Elena reached Richard's desk and spoke softly. "Good afternoon. I'd like to check my account balance, please." Richard's lips curved into what he thought was a professional smile, but held a trace of condescension. "Of course. Do you have your account number?" She pulled a folded paper from her jacket pocket, creased and worn, as if carried for a long time. Richard took it with 2 fingers, careful not to let the paper's condition affect his pristine desk. "This might take a moment," he said, typing with exaggerated slowness, as if explaining to a child. Behind him he heard Jessica suppress a small laugh. Elena said nothing. She simply stood there, her dark eyes calm and patient, hands folded in front of her. There was something in her stillness that Richard found irritating, a dignity that didn't match her appearance. The system loaded. Richard expected to see perhaps a few €100, maybe a closed account, possibly even an error. His finger hovered over the mouse, ready to gently explain that she might need to visit a different department. Perhaps social services could help her with... The numbers appeared on the screen. Richard's hand froze. His breath caught in his throat. The smile melted from his face like wax near flame. Balance, 3,742,891 euros, 47 cents. He blinked again. The numbers didn't change. His face drained of color, then flushed red with embarrassment. Jessica noticed his sudden stillness. "Richard, everything okay?" Thomas stood up in his office, sensing something unusual in the atmosphere. Richard's fingers trembled slightly as he gripped the desk edge. He looked up at Elena, who stood exactly as before, calm, unhurried, waiting patiently. Her expression showed no triumph, no vindication, just quiet acceptance, as if she'd expected exactly this reaction. Around them, the bank's usual rhythm faltered. Employees began noticing Richard's frozen state, the peculiar tableau at Station 3. Elena finally spoke, her voice gentle but clear. "Is there a problem with my account?" Richard's throat had gone completely dry. He tried to speak, but only a small sound escaped. The number on the screen seemed to glow with accusatory brightness. 3,742,891 euros 47 cents. A fortune that mocked every assumption he'd made in the last 5 minutes. No problem at all, miss. He scrambled to find her name on the screen. "Miss Rivera, please have a seat," He gestured frantically to the leather chair across from his desk, his earlier condescension replaced by flustered politeness. Elena sat down gracefully, as composed as if she'd been treated with respect from the beginning. Thomas Brighton was already making his way across the marble floor, his manager's instinct sensing something significant. Jessica leaned toward her neighboring colleague, whispering urgently. Within moments, a ripple of curiosity spread through the branch. "Miss Rivera," Richard began, his voice cracking slightly. "I apologize for your account is certainly in excellent standing. How may I assist you today?" Elena looked at him with those steady dark eyes. "I'd just like to make a withdrawal, please. Nothing complicated." Richard's hands trembled as he positioned them over the keyboard. "Of course. What amount would you—" 500,000 euros, Elena said calmly. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Thomas, who had just reached the desk, stopped mid-stride. Richard felt sweat forming on his brow. This was beyond his authority, beyond anything he'd handled in his entire career. That's quite a substantial amount, Miss Rivera. May I ask what the funds are for? It's just procedure, you understand." For the first time, a small smile touched Elena's lips. A donation to the Riverside Children's Education Foundation. The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas stepped forward, extending his hand. "Miss Rivera, I'm Thomas Brighton, the branch manager. Perhaps we could discuss this in my office? For a transaction of this magnitude, I'd like to ensure we provide you with our very best service." Elena shook his hand. "That's kind of you, but it's really quite straightforward. I've already completed the paperwork." She withdrew another document from her jacket, this one pristine and official, bearing the foundation's letterhead. As Thomas examined the document, Richard sat paralyzed, his mind racing backward through the interaction, the smirk he'd given Jessica, the careful way he'd taken Elena's paper, as if it might contaminate him, the exaggerated patience in his voice, as if speaking to someone slow or simple. Shame burned through him like acid. "Miss Rivera," he said suddenly, his voice raw with genuine emotion, "I owe you an apology. My behavior when you arrived was unprofessional and disrespectful. I made assumptions based on appearance, and I was completely wrong." Elena turned to look at him. Her expression wasn't angry or triumphant. It was something far more powerful. It was understanding, mixed with a quiet sadness, as if she'd encountered this situation many times before. "You weren't the first," she said softly, "and you won't be the last. But thank you for acknowledging it." Thomas looked between them, beginning to understand what had transpired. His jaw tightened with disapproval. Thomas Brighton gestured toward his glass-walled office. "Please, Miss Rivera, let's complete this transaction properly. Richard, join us." Inside the office, Elena sat with the same quiet composure, while Thomas personally processed the donation. Richard stood nearby, still grappling with his shame, watching this woman who had every right to be angry yet showed only grace. "If you don't mind me asking," Thomas said carefully, "the Riverside Children's Education Foundation, is there a particular reason you chose them?" Elena's gaze drifted toward the window, toward the city beyond. "I grew up 3 blocks from where their new center will be built. My mother worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. There was never money for tutoring or books or the programs other kids had." She paused, her fingers tracing an invisible pattern on the armrest. "When I was 12, a teacher named Mrs. Patterson stayed after school every day for 6 months to help me with mathematics. She didn't have to. She wasn't paid extra. But she saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Richard felt his throat tighten. "That foundation," Elena continued, "will provide free tutoring, mentorship, and resources to children whose parents work the jobs my mother worked. Children who need someone to believe in them." Thomas nodded slowly. "It's an incredible gift. This will change hundreds of lives." "That's the idea," Elena said simply. Richard finally found his voice. "How did you... if it's not too personal, how did someone so young accumulate such wealth?" Elena smiled, not offended by the question. 5 years of working 3 jobs simultaneously. I delivered food at night, cleaned offices before dawn, and coded websites during the day. Every spare rupee went into learning about investments. She leaned forward slightly, her passion showing for the first time. I studied technology companies, watched market patterns, learned about cryptocurrency when most people thought it was a joke. I lived in a tiny apartment, ate simple food, wore secondhand clothes. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. But why? Richard asked. Why live like that when you had resources? Because wealth isn't about what you wear or where you live, Elena said firmly. It's about what you can do, who you can help, what legacy you can leave. Every designer outfit I didn't buy meant another 1,000 euros toward this moment. Thomas finished the transaction, printing the confirmation. The foundation will receive the funds within 48 hours. Elena stood, taking the document. Thank you both. As she turned to leave, Richard stepped forward. Miss Rivera, wait. I need you to know, what happened today changed something in me. You could have been angry, could have demanded to see my supervisor, could have made me pay for my prejudice. Instead, you showed dignity and purpose. Elena looked at him thoughtfully. Richard, everyone deserves a chance to grow. You made a mistake, you acknowledged it, and now you'll do better. That's all any of us can do. She extended her hand. Richard shook it, feeling the calluses from honest work, the strength in her grip. Besides, she added with a slight smile, staying angry takes energy. I'd rather use that energy to change the world. 6 months passed like pages turning in a story no one at Sterling Heights Bank would forget. Richard Chen stood before the assembled staff in the bank's conference room, leading a training session he'd personally requested to create. On the screen behind him were simple words. Every customer deserves dignity. We make dozens of judgments every day, he told his colleagues. Someone's clothing, their accent, the way they carry themselves. We let these things write stories in our minds before we even say hello. I did exactly that, and I nearly missed witnessing one of the most extraordinary acts of generosity I've ever seen. He shared Elena's story, with her permission, leaving out identifying details but keeping the essential truth. Several staff members shifted uncomfortably, recognizing their own prejudices in his account. Thomas Brighton watched from the back of the room, proud of the changes he'd seen in his senior consultant. Richard had become an advocate, speaking up when he noticed other staff making assumptions about customers. The culture of Sterling Heights was shifting, one interaction at a time. That afternoon, as Richard returned to his desk, he saw something that made him pause. A man in paint-stained overalls approached the consultation area, carrying a worn backpack. Richard noticed Jessica beginning to exchange that familiar glance with another teller. He caught her eye and shook his head gently. She paused, then nodded, understanding. Richard stood immediately. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to Sterling Heights. My name is Richard Chen. How may I help you today? The man seemed surprised by the warm greeting. I'd like to open a savings account for my daughter. She's starting university next year. That's wonderful, Richard said genuinely, gesturing to a chair. Please, have a seat. Let's talk about the best options for her future. Meanwhile, across the city, Elena Rivera stood at the back of a crowded room, watching as Mayor Holloway cut the ribbon on the Riverside Children's Education and Mentorship Center. Cameras flashed, politicians made speeches, and the foundation's director thanked an anonymous donor whose extraordinary generosity made this dream a reality. Elena had declined the public recognition just as she declined the premium banking services, the investment consultations, and the private wealth management Thomas had offered. She'd kept her regular account, her simple lifestyle, and her 3 jobs, though she'd shifted her focus to mentoring young women in technology and finance. A young girl no more than 10 approached her shyly. Are you here for the opening? I am, Elena smiled. Are you excited about the new center? The girl's eyes lit up. They're going to have free coding classes and math tutoring. My mom says it's like a miracle. Elena knelt down to the girl's level. No miracle, just people choosing to help each other. Maybe someday you'll do the same for someone else. I will, the girl promised solemnly. I definitely will. As Elena walked home that evening, past the community garden where she still volunteered, past the tiny apartment she still called home, she smiled. The number in her bank account had decreased, but her wealth, the kind that truly mattered, had grown immeasurably. Behind her, the setting sun painted the new education center in golden light, full of promise and possibility, a legacy built not on appearance or assumption, but on the simple truth that everyone deserves a chance, respect, and someone who believes in them.